Captain David Cheap and Midshipman John Graves thought the storm was their greatest enemy, but what waited on the shattered shore was far more deadly. As the Wager sank beneath icy waves, betrayal brewed among the survivors, turning comrades into killers in a desperate fight for treasure and survival. In 1741, the British warship the Wager departed from the coast of South America as part of a secret mission designed to disrupt Spanish trade routes. On board were over 100 men, naval officers, marines, and common sailors, each of them hardened by months at sea. Tension hung in the salt, heavy air, worsened by the burden of their stolen treasure, Spanish gold taken during a recent raid. It was meant to be a triumph for the crown, but even before they left the coastline, the sea had other plans. The route ahead was treacherous, a gauntlet of storms and shifting ice fields near the infamous Cape Horn. Few ships survived those waters. Still, the captain believed they could make it. He was a man of rank and pride, but not of health. A fever had taken hold of him weeks earlier, and now he commanded more from his cabin than the deck. The journey quickly deteriorated. Violent gales howled day and night, slamming the ship with massive waves. The crew worked in freezing rain, their hands blistered and raw from hauling ropes and patching sails. The ship creaked and groaned as though protesting every mile forward. Food rations ran low, forcing them to stretch supplies far beyond safety. Discipline weakened. Fights broke out over hardtack and dried meat. Below deck, men whispered their fears and questioned the captain's decisions. Some blamed the officers, others blamed God. No one dared speak of mutiny, not yet. Then came the storm that changed everything. Black clouds swallowed the horizon as if the sea and sky had merged into one. Thunder rolled for hours, each flash of lightning revealing a nightmare of twisted rigging and flooding decks. The ship had lost its bearings days earlier, and now the wind drove it blindly into uncharted waters. When the rock struck, it was not with a bang, but with the horrible, grinding crack that splintered the hull. Men were thrown across the deck as seawater poured in. Cannons broke free and rolled like thunder within the ship's belly. In minutes, the Wager was finished. The survivors flung themselves into the churning sea, clinging to wreckage, barrels, or each other. Some were pulled under instantly, swallowed by the same ocean they had tried to conquer. Others swam toward a faint outline of land in the distance, a barren, wind-ripped island that offered no comfort, only a cold reminder of their situation. When morning came, the storm had passed, but the Wager was gone. Broken planks and scattered debris washed ashore as the survivors stumbled onto the rocky beach. There were no cheers, no sense of victory, only exhaustion and silence. Their ship had sunk, their supplies were nearly gone, and their captain lay unconscious on a slab of wet driftwood. The island stretched bleakly in every direction, with no signs of life, no food, and no promise of rescue. The men were alive, but for how long and under whose rule remained uncertain. The true battle was just beginning. The survivors of the Wager gathered on the bleak, rain-soaked shore, their faces hollow with shock. The island was harsh and unwelcoming, offering little more than jagged cliffs, patches of moss, and relentless wind. Their clothing clung wet and cold to their bodies, and their fingers trembled, not only from the chill, but from the fear of what lay ahead. The wreckage was scattered along the shoreline, broken beams, crates, and torn sails, reminders of the ship that was meant to carry them home. Some of the crew immediately began searching for food, scouring the rocky ground and tide pools for anything edible. Others attempted to salvage usable materials from the wreck, dragging wood and barrels from the surf. The captain, weakened by his illness and injuries from the wreck, was carried to a makeshift shelter fashioned from canvas and driftwood. Though he was the highest-ranking officer, his grip on authority was slipping fast. Hunger, despair, and suspicion were setting in among the men. No one had expected to be stranded, and few were prepared for the brutal reality of survival without command, food, or hope. The rules of the Royal Navy no longer held the same weight. On land, titles and uniforms lost their power. What mattered now was who had food, who had strength, and who had followers. Disputes began almost. At first, they thought he'd frozen during the night, but closer inspection revealed a gash on the back of his head and bruises around his neck. It wasn't an accident. Someone had killed him. The officers demanded answers, but no one came forward. Eyes shifted, fingers pointed in silence. The unease deepened. Everyone began sleeping with weapons close at hand, knives, pieces of metal, even sharpened bones. The gold, hidden in small crates during the voyage, had also washed ashore. Though the crew was starving, the presence of treasure created a new kind of madness. Some wanted to bury it for safekeeping. Others wanted to divide it and flee. The sight of glittering coins in the dirt only fueled suspicion. Men began watching each other too closely, whispering in corners, forming secret alliances. As days turned into weeks, the island grew colder, the fires burned lower, and the men once comrades bound by loyalty and mission were now prisoners of fear. The shipwreck hadn't killed, not yet, but the island and each other might. By the third week on the island, the last thread of discipline snapped. Hunger had turned men into shadows of themselves, and the cold had made them ruthless. The officers' commands were now little more than empty echoes, drowned out by the rising voices of rebellion. The old naval hierarchy had disintegrated completely, replaced by the rule of the strong, the cunning, and the cruel. Leading this shift was a midshipman named Graves, a man who once followed orders without question, but now saw an opportunity to claim power for himself. Graves blamed the ship's officers for the wreck, the lack of supplies, and the death of the sailor found murdered days earlier. He spoke quietly at first, to small groups huddled around fires, planting seeds of doubt and resentment. As the conditions worsened, his following grew. He offered them something the officers couldn't control, not just over their survival, but over their future. He promised them escape, the gold, and the chance to rewrite their story. To men with nothing left to lose, it sounded like salvation. One morning, before the sun rose, Graves and his followers stormed the officers' shelters. There was no bloodshed at first. The captain, too weak to resist, was dragged from his makeshift bed and left out in the cold. The first lieutenant was beaten and stripped of his rank insignia. The remaining officers were forced to kneel before Graves, who declared a new command. There would be no more ranks, no more orders from men who had failed them. From now on, leadership would be earned by action, not title. Not everyone accepted this change, but resistance meant exile or worse. Those who opposed Graves were sent to the far edge of the island, beyond the shelter of the cliffs. Some disappeared into the wilderness, never seen again. Others died quietly, their bodies found days later, half buried by the wind and sand. Graves ruled through fear and necessity. He knew the only way to maintain power was to deliver a plan for escape. The gold, once a symbol of triumph, had become the island's poison. Graves assigned guards to watch over the crates day and night. He ordered a raft to be built from the remains of the wrecked ship, planks, ropes, and sails lashed together with whatever could be scavenged. Every man still loyal to him was expected to help. Those who did were promised a share of the treasure and a place aboard the raft when it sailed. Unknown to Graves, one man worked in silence among them. A gunner named Briggs had seen everything. He had no interest in power or gold. What he wanted was the truth, to survive, even if he did not. He kept a journal in secret, writing each night by the dying glow of embers. He recorded the mutiny, the murders, and the descent into madness. Then, he sealed the pages in a glass bottle and buried it deep beneath the stone marked only with a cross. While Graves prepared to leave, convinced he controlled the future, Briggs prepared a message for the world, proof of the terrible cost of their survival. Graves completed the raft with help from his closest followers, a crude but functional structure pieced together with planks from the wager, scraps of sailcloth, and rope made from torn uniforms and seaweed. It was barely seaworthy, but to the desperate, it looked like hope. He chose only a handful of men to accompany him, those he trusted, those who had proven their loyalty during the mutiny. The promise was clear: sail north, reach civilization, and claim the glory and wealth that waited beyond the horizon. The rest, the sick and the dissenters, were left behind on the island without a second thought. On the morning of their departure, the sky was unusually calm. The raft slid into the gray sea, and those on board clung to it like lifelines. Among them were soldiers, marines, and sailors who had once feared Graves, but now followed him as their last chance. As the island grew smaller behind them, the men ahead faced a new horror, the ocean they had once nearly drowned in. The cold was constant, the waves unrelenting, and supplies limited to a few crates of dried meat and stolen rations. With each passing day, the food dwindled, and so did the men. One sailor was swept overboard during a storm and never resurfaced. Another, weakened by starvation, was found lifeless in the morning. Graves remained silent through it all, focused only on the course ahead. He gave no speeches, offered no comfort. His promise of freedom had become a silent march toward death. The gold, packed into a sealed crate and lashed to the raft, was untouched, but constantly watched, as though its mere presence gave the voyage meaning. After weeks adrift, the survivors sighted land an isolated fishing village along the Chilean coast. The men staggered ashore, skin burned from the sun, bones sharp beneath their tattered clothes. The villagers took them in, feeding them, dressing their wounds, and asking no questions. Graves wasted no time. He crafted a story, one that painted him and his followers as the last remnants of a noble mission. He claimed the ship had gone down in a sudden storm, that the officers had died trying to save others, and that he had taken command only to preserve the lives of the few who remained. When they reached England months later, news of the Voyager's survivors arriving in England spread quickly. Graves, once a midshipman, now stood before lords and admirals, presenting himself as the reluctant hero of a doomed voyage. He spoke of storms, sacrifice, and leadership in chaos. His tale was dramatic, filled with loss and courage. He omitted the mutiny, the murders, and the gold. His followers supported every word, rehearsed and ready. For a time, the story was accepted without question. Graves was even considered for commendation. But far from England, across the Atlantic, another group was making its way home, led by the very men Graves had left to die. The former captain, gaunt and frostbitten, arrived in London with two other survivors, both bearing the scars of starvation and frost. Their version of events was different, dark, bitter, and bloody. They spoke of betrayal, of officers beaten and cast out, of a raft not built to rescue, but to escape justice. They claimed Graves had seized power by force, hoarded supplies, and left the weak behind to die. Most damning of all, they claimed the gold had never been reported, only stolen. The public didn't know whom to believe. Two versions of the same tragedy. Graves dismissed their claims as madness caused by starvation. He suggested the captain had gone delusional, that the harsh conditions had clouded his memory. The Admiralty, reluctant to act without proof, held off judgment. That proof arrived not in a courtroom or confession, but in a bottle. A year after the hearings began, a bottle was discovered by a fisherman along the Patagonian coast. Inside was a journal, pages curled and faded, but intact. It had survived storms and salt water, buried in the sand beneath a stone. The entries were written by the gunner Briggs, a man who never returned. His detailed record matched the accusations of the captain's group, the night of the mutiny, the secret meetings, the violence, and the gold. It included names, dates, and even a rough map of the island's layout, including where bodies were buried. The journal was sent to London and authenticated. The handwriting matched naval records. The contents could not be denied. Suddenly, Graves' heroism unraveled. The gold was traced to black market trades he had arranged during his time in South America. His followers began to break ranks, offering reduced sentences in exchange for testimony. Graves was arrested, his reputation destroyed. The treasure was never fully recovered. Some believed it was still buried on the island, others that it had been hidden somewhere in Europe. The Admiralty quietly changed its policies on shipwreck conduct and mutiny, but the story never fully faded. For years afterward, sailors whispered about the Voyager, about how men became monsters when rules vanished. The wreck of the ship remained where it had sunk, but its legacy drifted across time, proof that survival came not only with scars, but with secrets meant to stay buried.